Good evening. I'm Selwyn Collins, your host of CWS Conversations with Selwyn. Thank you for joining us this evening, and those of you joining us for the first time, a very special thank you. Tonight, I anticipate a packed show. The guest is a young man, actually the son of a very close and dear friend to me, and his name is Jared Peroune. But before I go into or introduce you formally to Jared Peroune, I want to talk a little bit about change. Change and courage. Um, I think change is very important. I think change impresses itself upon us. I think change is ubiquitous. Change is always around. It tries. It's always forcing itself in or out of us, and I feel that I believe that when we resist change in whatever form, however way, that's what causes pain and suffering. And my advice or my suggestion is to embrace it. And if you see change in others, especially change for the good or whatever is positive, encourage them. In terms of courage, I can't speak enough on how important courage is. We are human beings, and there are times when we have our own individual feelings, and fear seeps in to the moment, and we can become paralyzed. But what we must remember is that we are humans, and we have to try as much as we can to overcome that fear and and try to be courageous as possible. One person asked me, how do you do this every week, and go out there and just talk and do your monologue and so on. And my first response was, I don't know. But then I thought about it and I realized, well, yes, I do know. I go out because I love this. I'm always looking for people, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And before I go on, I just want to introduce the new listeners to our show. It's the goal of CWS is to have conversations with people about their journeys and how are they using their gifts and talents to others, to help each other. Um, why tonight? Why I feel special about tonight is because my guest, Jared Peroune, is a young man. And one of the things I started doing recently is if you look on the website, there's a page called Youth where I highlight young people who are doing positive things or extraordinary things with their lives. And the reason for this is that I believe that there's millions and millions of young people around the world who are suffering from all sorts of social illnesses. And the consensus is that they need an adult in their lives, and they need an adult role model or mentor, which is true. But it's to me, it's only half of the truth. The other part of the truth is other young people that are doing positive things can impact them positively. Hence the term positive peer pressure, because I believe peer pressure doesn't have to be negative. And so back to Jared, he's here. He's a young man. Working on his PhD in music, an accomplished pianist, and I invited him to share with us his journey so that he can not only inform and enlighten us and inspire us with his journey, but other young people as well. So I'll take a break, and when I return, I will introduce you to Jared Peroune. Good evening. I'm back. Those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm your host, Selwyn Collins of CWS Conversations with Selwyn. The young gentleman next to me is Jared Peroune. Jared, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Collins. How are you?
I am fine, thank you. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks.
Good. First of all, thank you for coming on the show. I
My
am
pleasure.
happy to have you. You know,
Happy to be here. Thank you.
wonderful. Let me just go into your bio just a little bit. Jared Peroune is a doctor of musical arts candidate in collaborative piano at the University of Miami. Quickly becoming an established accompanist and chamber musician, Jared has collaborated with a number of vocalists and instrumentalists throughout South Florida. He has been heard in concerts and recitals throughout Florida and his hometown of Georgetown, Guyana. With the Miami Collegium Musicum, often in collaboration with the Miami Bach Society, he has become a regular continuo organist. He has performed with Amici Delarte, is that correct
Yes,
pronunciation?
Michi Dell'Arte.
Delarte, the Hispanic American Lyric Theater, and the Master Chorale of South Florida with the Frost Symphony Orchestra at Miami's own Adrian Asht Center, among others. Um, I'm not going to read the rest of it, Jared, because I think during our conversation a lot of these things will come out. But let me just read a quote. I just believe that music isn't for ourselves. So I think, especially as a performer and teacher, that it is our responsibility to share what we have with others. That's your quote. Can you
Yes.
tell us what the statement means to you and how it affects your interaction with others, especially in music?
Well, the talents that we have and the talents that we're given are not for us alone, whether it be for the audiences we perform for or whether it be for the people we come in contact with as students, as other musicians. We all learn from each other and we all feed off each other all of the time. So that's not possible if we in any way keep our talents to ourselves.
Well said. What is your earliest memories of music?
My earliest memories of music, I remember my grandmother's house, my mother's mother, she always had a piano in the house. And I remember we had all sorts of toys that played music and made different that played different melodies and things like that. And I remember times trying to copy the melodies on the piano.
Hmm.
Once we moved to the States, I began middle school, and one of my teachers, one who I looked up to very much, she drafted some of us into an after school program where we played small bells, and those students that showed a little more interest and a little more aptitude for music, she put in that class, and I've always looked up to her for many things. So when I realize that she does most of what she does in music, I try to follow her as much as possible with that. And
Yeah.
I was about 8 or 9 at the time, so
Okay. And
that's when it became very consistent for me.
so I'm going to ask you, so I don't know if it's the same teacher, of all your teachers, who would you say has had the most influence on you?
I There was a lady I met at the university, but at Barry University when I first started college. Her name was Beverly Coulter. She was everything that I saw myself turning out to be at the time, especially.
Hmm.
She was she's on vocal faculty there, so she does a lot of the opera and a lot of the classical singing with many of the students there. But my first encounter with her was not singing, but with piano, because she did all of her college degrees in piano, and the singing came later. So when I saw her sitting at the piano, and then see her get up and sing a second later, it occurred to me that she was somebody I knew I was going to look up to and follow very closely. And between my entering college back in 2003 and now, I still work with her very closely all the time.
Have you ever actually told her the impact
Oh
she
yes,
had?
she knows very much. I call her my musical mother sometimes because she definitely is one who has driven my dreams, and she has shown me that a lot of things are possible
Hmm.
if you work for it, if you dream hard enough for it, if you put in the time.
And in addition to your teachers, who else who else has influenced you on the piano?
Aside from my teachers, I've had family members who have very closely watched my progress and have encouraged me to continue doing what I'm doing. My friends, especially those at school,
Mm-hmm.
who also do music, they know what goes into it and they know how hard one has to work to do it. So they are very encouraging as well.
I don't know if this question is fair, but I mean, you know, but I'll ask it: at what age did you realize that your musical gifts were perhaps a bit unusual?
At what age did I realize my musical gifts? What was that last part?
Were a bit unusual.
Um, I remember my fifth grade graduation.
Mm-hmm.
I had the same teacher that I originally had. She said something to the whole ensemble that was there, to the whole assembly that was there, that I hadn't really thought of very much. But she said it in such a way that really made me think, you know. And what she said was, earlier, I think it was the day before the graduation. I remembered I was at home and I had a little keyboard. It must have been, you know, not even the size, the length of my arm. And I remember playing out little tunes just by ear, you know, that I heard, or, you know, songs that were on the radio or whatever. And I showed it to her the following day. And so at the graduation, she said, you know, he has really excelled in things, and so much so that he's playing things just by ear. And to me, that really didn't seem like a big thing. I mean, people do that all the time everywhere now. So, but it made me think that, you know, even though it wasn't a big thing in the grand scheme of things, that to me, at 10 years old, you know, that seemed like a wondrous thing. And so I continued with that for a little while. When I was in high school, about, I think my 10th grade year, so I was about 15, 16 at the time, I joined a little group at the church where my family went. The music director put together a little group, a little band with me and some other guys my age, and she also mentioned to my parents that, you know, that I should probably take some private lessons because they would really enhance my abilities. So all those things kind of led to a sort of strange development, but a really interesting one at that.
Mm. So, would you say you're from a musical family?
That's a very interesting question because I know that most members of my family, my parents included, my older brother, even my younger brother and sister to some extent, not as much as my older family members, all did music when they were younger, a long time ago. But, you know, having a family sometimes will steer your life in a different direction. So they all have music in them, and it's been part of all of them for a while. And so I think that I do follow in that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So, did your parents encourage you in music?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, especially the way it started. It started mostly as a church thing, and that's where we did most of our performing and things like that. Most of our music practice was with church and church groups and everything like that. So it, you know, it kind of gave me a place in the church, as well as gave me the opportunity to progress in the musical world as well. So they were very encouraging of that fact. And now that they see where music has taken me and the things I'm able to do and the people I'm able to work with, they're really excited about that, and they do encourage the different things I do.
So, what would you say does it mean to be to what does it mean to you to be a Guyanese?
To be Guyanese,
Mm-hmm.
it means a lot of things. I'm very proud of the fact that you know, when I walk down the street, I'm not the same as everybody else. And even though I know that's mostly the case on the inside, because I'm a little bit crazy like most other musicians are,
Uh-huh.
it shows on the outside too. And then people, you know, Guyanese people tend to be very unique in with their features. So people always have a second look to wonder, oh, you know, where is that person from? So I think that's one thing. The other thing I love about Guyana is, especially in Georgetown, everyone is so closely knit. You know, it's such a small place compared to so many other places in the world. You get to know everybody, you get to know everything that's going on, and so the sense of community there is such that, you know, it becomes part of who you are. So even though I'm here, where this city is a lot, Miami is so much bigger than Georgetown, just in size, in demographics, and everything. You know, that sense of community makes me want to reach out to many people and work with a lot of people, know as many people as I can so that different possibilities, can come about.
Hmm. Your dad and my friend was very good on the piano when we were in high school.
Oh, yes.
He was even the pianist in the or keyboardist you might call it then in the school band. I don't know if you know that or you ever
No, I
mentioned
didn't
that
know
to you.
that.
Okay, well, I'm blowing him up tonight. Um, he was very good, very good.
Oh,
What was his reaction when he discovered your passion for the piano?
oh man, that was such a long time ago. I don't really think that it took him too much by surprise. One, because I didn't really start private lessons till I was about 15,
Mm-hmm.
but I did mention that I wanted to do it since I was about 9. But in different circumstances, that was at the end of elementary school. I was going to a new school. I did some keyboard classes at that school, and there's some different circumstances, led that desire in different ways. So when I ultimately started lessons and I started getting better with my private teacher and things like that, I think I think he it was kind of an affirmation maybe in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't necessarily say he was terribly surprised by what was going on.
Okay. So, what does music mean to you, Jared?
It means a lot of things. Practically speaking, it means income.
Mm-hmm.
um, but beyond that, it's a it's a mode of expression. It's a number of things. It's a reason to get up sometimes, because especially my field is mostly in collaborative music. So I very rarely reach into solo things. I'm doing that more and more now because I think it's part of what makes you a complete musician. But what I enjoy most and what I do most is the collaborative work. And so it's a social thing. I guess to answer your question, it's a social thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love that aspect of it more than anything. It's there are only so many things I think you can do in the world to truly be close to another individual, a group of people, and in certain musical situations, whether it be you know 2 people or a room full of 100 people, all working on the same piece. When everyone is together doing the same thing at the same time with the same piece of music and experiencing the same thing, the same emotions all at the same time, I think that's a very profound thing, and I think that is probably what makes the collaborative music the best thing for me. And that, I think, is what music probably means most to me.
So it's sort of a team effort.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
sort of. Everybody has their own thing, but everybody is doing it with the same intention.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. I'm just curious. I've seen big bands and
Hmm.
symphony orchestra and so on, and with a conductor.
Yes.
But I also saw one of your recordings on YouTube
Hmm.
where you had a piano and then there's a violinist, a cellist, I believe, and somebody else.
A viola, yes.
Right. I didn't see any sign. I didn't notice any conductor. What happens then? You're talking about collaboration. What
Hmm.
happens in? I guess it was a quartet, right?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
What happens there where everybody is playing independently, but at the same time they have to play synchronistically or as one? I'm not sure what a musical term is, but how?
Well, in a situation like that, in certain ensemble situation, well, in any situation that has ensemble, whether it be 2 people or 100 people, everyone has to first of all understand the music and have the same interpretation of what that music is, because that alone will give everybody the sense of where things need to go, the direction the music takes, where certain phrases lean and where they don't, and so everybody can perform toward that, and it would be in unison for lack of a better term. Now, in a situation like that where you have a quartet, in quartet situations, chances are that each person in the quartet has their solo moments within the ensemble realm, and what it becomes is it's a matter of, say the violin has a solo at a particular moment, then the rest of us, back off and let her take control there.
Mhm.
And then that control goes around from one person to the next. So it's just a matter of in those situations, it's a matter of hearing as well. Just being orally attentive, as well as understanding interpretation and things of that variety.
Um, Determined to succeed. That's a phrase on your ad.
Mm.
What does success look like to you?
Success is something I told myself at the beginning of this last semester, back in January, was I think that, especially in music, and especially at music in the collegiate level, we tend to put a lot of emphasis on pleasing our professors, pleasing the people around us, pleasing the people we work with, and I think we forget about ourselves a lot. Not to say that those are bad things, but I think that we can't forget that we have to get something out of it as well. So success to me is if I have a performance, if I'm practicing a piece, if I'm anything, preparing something, working with a colleague, anything of that variety, if I do what I need to do and I feel like I accomplished something or I feel good about the work I've done, then that to me is a success right there.
Thank you for that. And power of practice. Let's chat a little about that. Um, what is practicing like for you?
Practicing can be a lot of things. A lot of things. It can be anything from learning the music. It can be, trying different interpretations to see which one really fits best with what the composer's intents were. Practicing can be, I mean, I don't know if anybody would call it practicing, but sometimes I just sit and just hammer through things just for the sake of hammering through it. And sometimes, that gives me some kind of, emotional stimulation, mental stimulation, things like that. There's so many pieces that are for two pianists with one piano, with piano and other instruments, and sometimes just sitting and reading through something, is exciting enough. I don't know if one would call that practice as much as it is just jamming or something like that, I suppose. But practicing, depending on what your intention is for that moment, has can be many different things. It can be getting into a certain feeling, um, working things out in such a way that it's comfortable. I remember one teacher I worked with, a violin teacher. He mentioned to me that sometimes when we practice, it isn't so much about making things better, but it is about making it easier. And once you make something easier, it in effect makes it better as well. It's easier to make something better if it's easier for you to do,
Mm-hmm.
and it makes the whole experience more enjoyable. So I think the practice gears you to play things more enjoyably, more easier, if that makes any sense.
Are you disciplined about practice? Or
Oh yes, very much so, because I have very little choice.
right,
You
right.
know, you can't not be disciplined about practice, especially not in school or in different performance situations, because if you abandon that, then everything that's good about it starts to dwindle. So you really have to be very very diligent about practice.
I understand you play a lot of concerts and a lot of performances now and so on.
Yes.
Do you remember your first concert?
Ooh. Um, I've played different things in church when I was a lot younger, but my first, I would say, solo performance as a pianist
Uh huh.
was probably the first recital that I had with my teacher. My teacher does a year. My first teacher with piano does a yearly recital, studio recital, and it would have been about two, maybe beginning of summer 2004. She had no, maybe not that. I'm sorry, not that late. Probably beginning of summer 2001.
Mm-hmm.
She had her first studio recital the year that I was one of her students, and we each played, a piece or two. So that was probably my first public performance as a solo pianist.
So what are your fondest memories of that experience?
Fondest memories of that experience. I think I was the oldest student that she had there, so that already was a special thing. I remember being inexperienced with performing. So many different things can happen that you're totally unprepared for. I remember one of the things that occurred was there was a piece that it was a fugue, and the special thing about a fugue is there's a theme that repeats slightly differently over and over and over again. And so I remember I was about halfway through that piece and I completely forgot what came next. So what ended up happening was I just kind of played that same theme over and over and over again until I figured out where I was and was able to continue. So I think I, tripled the length of that movement just because I lost where I was.
That is smart. So, what came first for you, Jared? Your desire to be a pianist, or your knowledge of music?
My knowledge of music for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When I was in that elementary school group that played the Little Bells, there was a lot of theory that went along with it. So I learned that fairly well. I learned to read music fairly well. When I got into middle school and I took a class in piano, we all learned, small little songs from a method book on a small 5-octave keyboard. So you don't get very much pianistic training out of that. But I went to a computer magnet middle school, so the classes that took place in the magnet division of the school all required some amount of computer-based learning. So in a music class, what can possibly what can possibly be a music computer-based program? So we used a lot of MIDI programs and a lot of theory computer programs. So since half of our class had to be tailored to computer learning, half of the time I was in that class was spent on the computer. So I learned a lot of theory that way. We also studied a lot of music history, different genres, things like that. So I learned a lot of those things. So when I finally started taking private lessons well into high school, I had a lot of basis of music theory. I could read music fairly well and a good background in music history as well.
Hmm.
So things progressed quickly.
So who are some of your greatest influences in music?
Say that one more time.
Who are some of your greatest influences in music?
Some of my greatest influences, that very first teacher I had,
Mm-hmm.
I after I left middle school, I never saw or heard from her again. So I don't know, but she really did set a foundation of love of music, learning music, those kinds of things. My first private teacher, she taught me a lot too, and I think she really paced things for me where I was, the age I was, the pace at which I was developing. She made things such that I was able to learn things really well. Then I studied with her 2 or 3 years before I started college, and that's when I met Dr. Coulter, who really, fostered a lot of who I've become, I think, today, even and continues to even till now. I've known her just about 10 years now, and every time I work with her, I learn something new, and she really has pushed me to be who I am, and really has taught me a lot about music and a lot about life and how those things go together.
Isn't that a great teacher-pupil relationship where the pupil never gets tired enough? I mean, too tired of learning because there's always something new, something fresh to learn.
Absolutely. In music, you never stop learning.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much in the world, and everything has something to teach you, and there's so much to learn in one lifetime. So you'll always be learning something, always.
Which contemporary pianists most impress you and why?
Contemporary pianists.
Mm.
Hmm. Alive or not alive?
Um, go for it. I mean, you can.
Both. I think Vladimir Horowitz, I know that's probably a cliche answer to the question, but Vladimir Horowitz was a lot of things. And I think one of the things he was mostly was a very natural musician, very natural pianist. One of the things that has happened in the world of music is things have become very scholastic, very academic, which is nice to some extent, but people have forgotten that nature takes a big part in the arts as much as education and scholastics and academics,
Mm-hmm.
and I gear more towards those who do things from a very organic place. Organic, a teacher of mine used to love using that word a lot, from a very organic place and a very natural way of going about things. And he, I think, more than anybody, has really accomplished that. Has really done that a lot. A lot. It's not about playing every note exactly in the right place at the right time. It's about expressing something and doing it from a place that is very natural. So he, more than anybody, in the last 50 years, I would say, has accomplished that for me.
Hmm. And What are your thoughts and habits with respect to practicing?
When I sit down to practice, the number one thing I aim to do is make it easy for myself. Certain passages are difficult, certain passages are not difficult, but they all have to be easy at the end of the day. They all have to be a similar amount of easy.
Hmm.
You know, some passages are easy right away, some passages are easy after you practice them for a week. But my goal every time I sit at the piano is to make it easier so that I can get past how hard and difficult it is and get to the point where I'm enjoying what I'm doing. So,
That's a good philosophy, or principle to adapt. That eventually it must become easy, so you practice until you know
mm,
until it becomes easy.
right, you practice in a way that it becomes it's one should never practice the same thing the same way twice because if it doesn't work one time, it surely won't work the second time. So you wouldn't want to do it the same way twice. So it's a discovery. It's like a puzzle you have to solve. You're working to see what movements feel the most natural and
Hmm.
therefore become the most easy.
Gotcha. Um, Let me go to the chat room. There's Kim. Kim asked, "What makes you play?"
What makes me play?
Hmm.
Hmm. Music, I think, is something that has become so much a part of me that I feel like not playing would be kind of a crime against myself in a way. So, to keep my own sanity, I have to express myself through music.
I like that. And she asked again, "Are you partial to classical?" I guess she meant classical music.
Am I a part of what?
Partial, partial. Do you prefer classical music?
Oh, am I partial to classical music? I would say so, yes.
Hmm.
Other styles of music are good too, are great, as a matter of fact, but I think most of what I do is in the classical realm.
Okay. You were recently featured as a harpsichord soloist in a benefit concert to raise money for the $18,000 instrument purchased by Corpus Christi Church. I
Yes.
understand that the harpsichord is relatively new to you. Uh,
Um, in a way, yes, especially compared to the piano, for
okay,
sure.
so what are some differences between the harpsichord and the piano?
The harpsichord, the main difference would lie in the touch. The piano, the keys are weighted such that if you touch a piano key lightly, the sound is softer. If you touch a piano key harder, the sound is louder. On a harpsichord, it doesn't matter how you touch the key; it's going to make the same level of sound. So, how you articulate different passages, how you articulate different notes, how you touch the keys is what influences the sound on the harpsichord, not so
Okay.
much the pressure at which you touch it. The sound is also different. The keys, the strings of the piano are sounded when the hammer strikes the string. In a harpsichord, there are little quills that pluck the strings.
Oh. Well, what was it like playing the harpsichord for the first time?
This concert in particular was very exciting for me because, well, one, I was a featured soloist, so that was exciting enough. But it also gave me an opportunity to experience what music was like before the piano. The piano is a relatively new instrument
Hmm.
compared to some of the other things that have been around long, long, long before, harpsichord included. The harpsichord is a very special instrument because it requires a sensitivity and an ear that is beyond, I think, sometimes what even the piano is. The piano, you can influence things 20 different ways doing exactly the same thing, whereas the harpsichord you cannot necessarily, but achieving certain sounds and certain feelings through those sounds is a special thing.
Before I want to take a break, but before I take a break, I want to ask you this.
Yes.
Well, actually, I make a statement. I believe that music is the greatest of the arts. What do you think about that? Do you agree or disagree? And
Music, especially anything in music, I think singing to playing instruments, as much as there's an artistic aspect to it, there's also a very physical aspect to it as well. It requires a control of your body,
Mhm.
just like any athlete might have to control their body when they play their sport. Just like, you know, So I think that that makes music a very special thing, more so than some of the other arts even. Some things, painting, drawing, things of that variety, are all very visual. um, Dance is very physical too, but that is purely physical, whereas music, you have to express something through voice, or through, your body has to manipulate another instrument, another thing. And that's a very special thing too, and I think that is very humbling, and 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 so on.
Okay, Jared, let's take a break.
Okay.
We are back with Jared Peroune. How are you holding up, Jared?
I'm all right, thank you.
Good. Are you compelled to play? If so, what compels you?
What compels me to play? I think the piano, no offense to anyone, but a lot more than other instruments, it's a grand thing to accomplish, and and a beast of a thing to overcome. So it's very humbling when you sit at the piano. So I think that working toward, mastering something of that variety is a really compelling thing to do.
Mhm.
So when I sit at the piano, it's a there's a desire to want to do well, because it's such a grand thing in itself.
Your bio said you have become a regular continuo organist. What does that mean?
A lot of what that group does, they do a lot of early music, and early music doesn't really have any piano in it because the piano wasn't invented just yet.
Hmm.
So the instruments that were used when those pieces were performed were organ and harpsichord and things like that. So when we do programs with those kinds of pieces, we try to do them as accurately as possible, and so we use organ sometimes or harpsichord sometimes. The practicality exists also, that the organ that we use, it's a small portative organ is what it's called, and it's a lot easier to move than a harpsichord. So most of the concerts we do use the portative organ
Hmm.
as opposed to the harpsichord. So since most of what the programs consist of with the group, with the Miami Music Collegium, is you will utilize the harpsichord. So when we play, we use the harpsichord. I mean, I'm sorry, the organ. So we use that quite a bit.
This past year, you have I believe it's this past year, right? You've performed with Amici Dell'Arte.
Yes,
And
Amici Dell'Arte is a very unique. It's a very unique company. The creator, Joanne, what she's done is she's created a network of musicians, especially local ones, every variety, singers all the way through pianists, string players, every variety of musician. And what it is a large networking community where we all get together and do things together, or if she's contacted by an outside organization or something that requires somebody, anybody, then
Hmm.
she can find who's available and set something up that way.
And there were who else? There's the Frost Symphony Orchestra at Miami's own Adrian Arch Center, among others. So how are these performances affecting your development as a pianist and artist?
Very much so, because with each new performance, I have so many new people to work with, and with each person I work with, there's so much to learn from those individuals. The Frost Symphony project, when we performed at the Adrian Arts Center, was one of the biggest things because that orchestra required a lot of people. So, we did it with the huge chorus, the Master Chorale of South Florida, and one of the chorales from the University of Miami. So I remember the dress rehearsal for that project, we were in a small room rehearsing, and there were 300 of us in the room between the orchestra and the chorus. So that you're just one of a huge conglomeration of individuals all doing the same thing, which is a really magnificent thing.
So as a rising artist in opera, you've
Yes.
had recent performances. What can you tell us about some of those?
Opera is that's another thing. Singing is another thing that is just so profound because you are your own instrument, and manipulating your own instrument to create certain sounds and to do different things is it's really quite magnificent.
Hmm.
um, I got into opera because of Dr. Coulter as well. She was on voice faculty there at Barry, and most of what she did was work with all the opera students. I was one of those when I started college and when I started piano in general. I was one of those people I hated to practice. It was just not so much the act of practicing, but it was just a lot of alone time.
Hmm.
Pianists spend hours and hours and hours a day just practicing in a room by yourself, and that wasn't for me at the time. So I started following around my friends, doing what they were doing, and they were all singing in the opera, so I sang with them. Since then, and since I've worked very closely with those who do it all the time, I got drafted to do lots and lots of operas and be in lots of singing productions. So then, little by little, I got better at it, and so now I get to do principal roles in operas every now and again, and singing also, there's a lot to learn from it, and there's a lot you can learn from it that you can then apply to playing the piano as well.
Hmm. So do you ever get nervous when you're in front of an audience, and how do you
All the time.
how do you
I don't think that ever goes away for
how do,
most people.
how do you manage that?
I think when you've worked something out in such a way that it's the comfortable for you
Uh-huh.
and you're enjoying what you're doing, nerves kind of take a backseat to those things.
So how do you prepare yourself mentally before a performance?
It's just a matter of making things comfortable. If I'm comfortable in what I'm doing, regardless of how nervous I will be, it will work out. So that's part of practice, I guess. Making things easy. When you're practicing such that you're trying to make things easier for yourself, then with the ease comes comfort, and with comfort, very few things can go wrong.
So what would you say is the most challenging thing to conquer as a keyboardist?
What is the most challenging thing to what?
To conquer as a keyboardist?
As a keyboardist,
Hmm.
I think getting to that point where things are so comfortable that you don't have to think about it anymore. Depending on certain pieces are really quite profound and they're a big task to overcome. So working on those pieces and getting to that point where you really don't have to think about what you're doing so much anymore, that can be very challenging sometimes.
And this brings us to my next question. At what age did you begin thinking of the problem of piano technique?
Um, hmm, that's an interesting question. I think it always kind of lingers at the back of your mind, even if you don't know what necessarily to call it. A lot of the time, especially when you're younger, or even now when you're learning certain things don't work right away, and you have to wonder why that is. And oftentimes, what it is, it's a fault in technique, or it's a lack of the technical understanding of what you have to do at a particular moment.
Hmm.
And so, I think even when you're younger and you don't necessarily know it's a technical thing or you don't know what name to give it, there's always that thought at the back of your head, why isn't this working? Why am I practicing this and it's not quite going the way I expect it to right now?
So, which classical pianists of old are among your favorites?
Of old?
Yes, the you know.
That's a very strange question. It's a very complex question at the same time because one of the fascinating things about musicians and music is that there's so many different styles of music. There's so
Mhm.
many different genres and different styles of classical music even that there's a huge range of things that a person can accomplish. Now, what's happened in the past is that you have certain pianists even that are better at some of those styles than others. So then you very rarely have a pianist that plays everything.
Mhm.
So it depends on what composers you might be talking about, what styles of classical music you're talking about, for there to be favorites in each. I would say, going back to Horowitz, I think he was one of those that really was able to cross many of those different borders and to really accomplish great things up well across the spectrum.
I want to talk a little bit about Chopin, right?
Okay.
Um, Very young Polish composer and virtuoso pianist of the Romantic era, they say. A
hmm
child prodigy as well, it is said. What do you think of his compositions and his style?
I think that Chopin is probably the greatest writer of piano music because he took many different styles of music that already existed and kind of turned them into something completely different. And that really is a mark of really great composers.
Hmm.
Either creating new styles or taking things that are there and really making them something completely profound. He's known for a lot for his mazurkas and polonaises, which are native Polish dances, and turning those, very urban, rural things into concert, pieces. Setting
Hmm.
them for the concert stage, I guess you could say, and that is a great accomplishment.
In the chat room, Alex asked, "Is there a composer you do not like?"
A composer that I do not like.
Hmm. I guess a
Um,
style or something.
Not really. I mean, there's something that most composers, all composers, have something to offer, and I think you have to respect them for that and for doing their thing. You can't really hate somebody for doing something that they feel compelled to do.
Going back to Chopin, right? And I'm assuming you probably played him. Which one of his etude is the most difficult for your hand?
Well, I haven't played all of them, but of the ones I have played,
Uh-huh.
um, hmm, one of the most difficult ones is the very first one, actually, because that one, the study there is a reach of a tenth, and my hand is not that big, so that reach is really a reach. So that very first etude, Opus 10 number 1, is probably the most challenging right now, because that reach is quite something, and my hand is relatively small.
And if you had to play it, what what then?
If I had to play it, it would require a lot of careful study.
Wow. It is said that literature is essential for the understanding of a composer. Outside of music, what are the other art forms that have captured your imagination?
Outside of music,
Uh-huh.
I like drawing. I don't draw very well, but I like drawing. What I found myself, I have a little side hobby where I do a lot of parabolic drawing,
Uh-huh.
which is basically it's pencil and ruler is basically what it is, and creating different designs and things like that solely with pencil and ruler. Everything is drawn with straight lines, so it's very interesting to me because there are so many different interesting things you can create with just straight lines,
Hmm.
and it's very mathematical. So there's very little room for error, which I like too, because again, I can't really draw very well. So when I'm able to create such magnificent things, you know, in that fashion, it makes me feel very, successful, I guess you could say.
You mentioned math. You mentioned mathematical, and it is said that where's that sound coming from? It is said that if you are good in math or good in music, you tend to be good in math. Is that true for you? Is that your experience?
For me, hmm, hmm. I hear that a lot, and people do say that a lot. I don't necessarily think that is the case. It just so happens that a lot of people are. I am very good at math, as a matter of fact, and I'd like to think that I'm very good at music too.
Hmm.
So maybe for some people there is more of a correlation there than for others, but I don't necessarily think that's not always the case, because I've known people who are terrible at math and very, very good at music, and who are terrible at music and very, very good at math. So there's a huge spectrum there, and I guess more people fall within the closer to the center of that. But I don't know if it would be fair to necessarily say that because you're good at one, you probably will be good at the next.
Right, right. When you think of Guyana,
What do I think of what?
when you think of Guyana and music,
Oh, yes.
what comes to mind?
Hmm. I think that there's a lot more potential for greater things to come out of Guyana in terms of music, in terms of people that might be able to write music, people that perform. I remember there have been a few times, I've had conversations with different people. You never know who's capable of what if they're not given the opportunity to experiment with those things. You walk into a restaurant or something, the person sitting at their table across from you could be the greatest singer in the world, but if they've never sung a note, you will never know that. The person, you walking down the aisle in the supermarket, and the cashier might be, could be the greatest flutist you've ever heard in your life, but if she's never picked up a flute, you will never know that. So I think that one of the unfortunate things with music in Guyana is that music isn't necessarily so accessible in a lot of varieties to many people. So I think there's a lot of potential that is not tapped into in Guyanese.
If you were consulted as to what needs to be done or what can be done
Hmm.
to introduce, or I shouldn't, it's not fair for me to say introduce, that's
Hmm.
rather presumptuous of me, but to sort of bring a certain flavor of classical music to Guyana,
Hmm.
what would you recommend or suggest?
I think the first thing would be to probably introduce more an appreciation for music, especially classical music. You know, a lot of people kind of figure out what they're interested in things when they experience it through other people, or when they experience it through TV or radio and things like that. You want to be a singer when you hear somebody singing. You hear you want to play a piano when you hear what the piano sounds like. So if you're not exposed to that a lot, then you don't know how much you might like it. So I think more and more, the more and more classical music that can be just playing, just floating in the air, is already a first step to introducing those kinds of things.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, and a
Um,
lot more Guyanese musicians too. I
mhm.
know there are lot of children who study music in Guyana, but I think once they reach a certain age or a certain level, they might not be encouraged enough to move on, because not to my knowledge anyway, but I don't think there's much of a future as a musician in Guyana necessarily, especially not a classical musician. So,
Mhm.
once you reach a certain age, a certain level, you have to start thinking about work, if you're going to have a family, those kinds of things, and pursuing a classical music career might not necessarily be the best choice. I mean, you could say that about anywhere, not just Guyana. So, so I think once you reach a certain age, if you're not at that age where you necessarily have performed a lot, then there aren't many people who have heard you perform, and so most people will not be interested in pursuing that kind of thing, I think.
In the chat room, P asked, "Do you or will you play jazz?
Do I what?
Do you or will you play jazz? Do you play jazz?"
Not regularly,
Mhm.
but it has come up before in past in different gigs and things like that. Everybody wants every kind of music, and sometimes you just have to do your best, even if it's not your strongest thing.
So you adapt.
Yeah, you do what you have to. You do
uh,
what you can. You do what you have to.
that's a very good a good attitude to adapt. Um, and it's kind of apropos to this next question. How can classical music influence our youths to be more positive?
Or what to be more positive?
Our youth.
Or you have to be more positive?
Mm.
I think there's something deep within you that you have to tap into when you study classical music. When you study music of any kind, basically when you do anything, to really do it well and to really understand what you're doing and the impact it can have on you and people around you, you really have to dig deep. You have to dig deep, and that kind of soul searching really, it crafts you into a person, crafts you into, a specific type of human being. If you do a lot of things that are just on the surface, just very superficial, then you don't really, you know, you don't really understand yourself even that well. If you leave a large part of you untapped, then you don't know what your full potential is. You don't know the whole. You're not a complete person yet.
What was your last music performance?
My last music performance was a week ago Saturday. A friend of mine and I put together a summer recital while she's down from school.
Oh, how was that?
It was good. It was a lot of fun. She's a very dear friend of mine, and we've gotten very close over the years. And having been away at school, we haven't been able to see each other very much. So, what better way than, to, nurture our friendship in the short time that we have during the summer than to do music together and to share that music with our friends and families.
Are most of your friends musicians?
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. I associate mostly with the people I work with and people I go to school with, and since most of my work, all of my work, and all of my school is music, then all of my friends, most of my friends are all music students as well, or musicians.
And talking about that, and I mean, you're relatively a young person, and I presume most of your friends and so on, they're young. Have you, among your friends,
Yes.
not necessarily piano, but any musical instruments, have you ever seen a performance by one of them that just stopped you and you were just awestruck by, like, wow, this person is really good?
Yeah, all the time. It happens all the time. If going back to what I was saying earlier about really getting in your practice and really, or in your performance, when you're really getting to you know what you're asking me about when you feel successful. When you accomplish something in such a way that you feel really good about yourself and really good about what you did, then that does something to you. Now, seeing someone else reach that point is really profound as well. So I enjoy doing that. When I see somebody performing and they have that look in their face, like they really feel good about what they did, then that to me is a very profound thing.
And you teach, right, Jared?
Yes.
Do you teach the piano, or what do you teach?
Yeah, piano mainly.
Have you ever taught someone, a child per se?
Hmm.
Do you teach children? I presume. Do you?
Yes.
Okay, a child that really
Mhm.
surprised you when you listen to or see them play.
Yeah, all the time. How a child will sometimes interpret what you're saying is a very interesting thing, because you'll say something thinking that you're communicating one thing, and then they do something else completely opposite of what you're saying, but at the same time they're still doing what you said. It's a very interesting thing, and it makes you wonder, well, A, am I really being clear with what I'm saying, or B, do I really understand what it is I'm saying, or C, I wonder what train of thought led that particular student to do what they did based on what I said. And I think that's a very interesting thing as well.
Have you ever listened to a child play? Um, I don't know if this is a fair question, but I'm curious. Listen to a child play, and you observe a style that is so developed that you feel perhaps you could use it.
That perhaps I could what?
You could use it. You can adapt it. Have you
Oh,
ever?
yes, for sure. A while ago, I was talking about, one of the things I really enjoy about certain musicians and the ones that I look to mostly are when they play things from a very natural, organic place. And that's something you will find a lot with younger pianists. Young children who learn things, their understanding of interpretation might not, be as profound as, or it might not be, their understanding of it might not be as clear as someone who's older and capable of understanding, deeper emotions and things of that variety. But when they play, it's uninhibited, and it comes from a place of purity, I suppose you could say. It's not tainted by anything, because they're too young to be tainted by anything almost. So I enjoy when children play, when younger people play. It there's there's a lot to get from it in that sense. That idea of it has to come from somewhere natural. It really does.
When you are um, when you're alone,
Hmm.
What type of music? What do you play? What do you play the most when you're.
What do I play on the piano, or what do I listen to?
Well, I'm gonna ask you about listen. Let's take the piano. What if you were by yourself and
Hmm.
you go on the piano, what would you most likely warm up with or play just for fun?
Sometimes I just make things up. When I'm warming up, especially, I just make things up because warming up sometimes is just a matter of getting the hands moving, so you can access different varieties of touch and different things like that. So
Hmm.
sometimes I just sit and I just hammer away just to get the blood flowing.
Have you ever surprised yourself on stage?
On stage,
Yeah.
oh, all the time. Sometimes, and sometimes you practice something so much that some things just don't work. Some things you're not really quite feeling it the way you want to. And then in performance, I don't know if it's the adrenaline or the nerves or call it what you want, but something happens sometimes, and you really just feel something at that moment. And you don't feel it at that moment until the time is there. The time it's time to do it. Do it now or don't do it at all. And I think that feeling sometimes really brings certain things out.
If you had a choice, or if you had to play another musical instruments other than the keyboard, what would you
Mhm.
choose?
Well, probably the cello.
Why?
So there's something about the tone of the cello that is just so great. I think well, string instruments in general are very good. I did actually 3.5 years of violin. It hurt the first day, but and I really enjoyed it. I never really practiced, so I'm not very good. But so string instruments in general are great, but the cello specifically, because the tone of it and the way you produce that tone is, I think, and even the way you play it is a very natural thing. I don't know. I guess I'm in this very natural mode of doing things in life nowadays, but to me that registers as something that is very very close to being the most natural thing.
Let's talk about tones a bit. I'm curious, so I'm going to ask you this. You talk about naturalness
Hmm.
on the piano.
Yes.
Um, where 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 would you go on the piano, on the keyboard, to sort of to find, how to put this. If you were being adventurous and you were looking to create a tone that sort of, let's say, a rebellious tone,
Hmm.
where would you go on the piano?
Probably in the lower register where the sounds are a lot fuller, a lot heavier. There's a lot of weight in the
Hmm.
sound. So that'd probably be the first place I go.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. And mellow and
Mellow,
solemn, sort of. Hmm.
probably in the lower middle register, because the sounds there still have some depth to it, but at the same time there's a lightness to it.
Hmm. Let's take a break, Jared.
No problem.
Little children, to come unto me. Every day, more than 30,000 children around the world die of preventable diseases. More than 300,000 children are being used in war as child soldiers. Lord have mercy. A child should be loved. A child should be held. A child should be clean. A child shouldn't smell. A child shouldn't go to bed hungry at night. A child should be taught wrong from right. A child should learn to say thanks and please. A child shouldn't suffer from preventable disease. A child is a fruit that shouldn't be picked before it's time. To do that to a child should be classified a crime. Who speaks for the children? Who gives them a voice? Who stands up for the children? Who gives the children a choice? A child is a flower, let him bloom, let her grow. A child should have the right to just say no when asked to perform unspeakable acts. This is a time when elders shouldn't turn their backs. Just listen to a child, you might learn a thing or two, cause you never ever know what a child is going through. A child shouldn't be taught to kill or hate. I pray to the Lord that we're not too late. Oh, who's for the children? Who gives them a voice? Who stands up for the children? Who gives the children a choice? A child shouldn't be bought or sold like cattle. A child should not be sent into battle. If a child is a mirror, a true reflection of our society, it's time to take action. Let's strip away the hate. Let's drop the phony act on the playground. Kids don't care about all that. They only care if you can play the game. Teamwork means we one and all the same. Oh, who speaks for the children? Who gives them a voice? Who stands up for the children? Who gives the children a choice? When I hit a home run or I score.
We are back with Jared Peroune. How are you holding up, Jared?
I'm doing good.
Good. I'm actually enjoying the conversation, so I'm glad.
So am I.
What is your opinion on the subject of competitions and how they mold a young pianist?
Competitions, that's a tough nut to crack. Well, competitions have become sort of a thing. It seems as though in any area of music, vocal music especially, and piano, it seems like competitions are the way to go. It seems like that's the thing that people work toward, especially when they're really young and starting, and a lot of teachers, teach toward the competition. A long time ago, competitions were, that was the beginning, and a lot of musicians nowadays think when they win something, that's the end. They're the best, they're the greatest, and everything like that. Whereas, 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago, when you won a competition, that was really the beginning of you becoming an artist, not the conclusion of it. So I think it's given everybody a false sense of accomplishment in a way. A friend of mine and I actually had a long chat about this recently, and she says, one of the things she feels is absolutely ridiculous about competitions nowadays is that a lot of musicians are crafted to be these machines and these, super pyrotechnic technicians. And when they go into a competition, it seems almost ridiculous because 12 of the 12 finalists in any given competition are already the greatest pianists they will ever be. Just for the mere fact that they've really just put everything they've got into it, which is absolutely great. But it seems like it's a competition where nobody wins in a way, and it's really a shame because I think it takes a lot of the joy out of the playing sometimes.
In your opinion, what is the most important function or purpose of performance art?
For me, I think it's being able to do what I do and really enjoy it. Mm-hmm. I think when I get up to do a performance, it's the most successful if I really just feel the greatest about what I just did. And I think since music is something that's so much a part of me, most of me, all of me, feels a really good sense of accomplishment when I do something and I do it well. And that to me, I think, means probably the most.
So what makes you play music?
What makes me play music? I don't know, I think it's just who I am, who I'm meant to be, and you kind of have to be true to yourself. And if I do music, I feel like I'm just being true to myself. So I think that's what makes me do it. It's who I am. It's who I think I'm meant to be.
And who do you play music for?
Anybody, everybody.
What is the most fun part of being a keyboardist?
About being a pianist?
Yeah.
Hmm. I think piano, more than many other instruments, allows me opportunity to work with a lot of people. You don't necessarily, you wouldn't necessarily give a solo violin concert. That's not really terribly interesting unless you're really that good.
Hmm.
So, you probably will need a pianist to play with you. If you're a singer, most singers don't really sing solo. You always need a pianist to play with you. So I think that piano kind of is a tool for me to work with people because everybody needs a pianist all the time.
And in that I ask this: what is the hardest part about being a pianist?
The hardest part?
Uh-huh.
Hmm. Well, you do have to hold up your end, and I think that sometimes gets a little challenging. If somebody hands you something that's complicated, or hands you something that is, really deep and everything like that, putting in your best to it and meeting that person halfway, I think, can be a little challenging sometimes. Um, yeah, just working with others is really great for a lot of things, but it also, you do have a responsibility not only to yourself but to someone else, and sometimes that can be a little difficult.
You said you learned at an early age to read music pretty well, and
Hmm.
you never stop learning music. So there's always improvements. Um, what is the last piece of music or score that kind of stop you in your tracks?
Right now, as a matter of fact, I have, as a doctoral student at University of Miami, we are responsible for playing a recital every year, a solo recital every year. I didn't do one this last year, so I'm going to be doing two this coming year. So
Hmm.
I scheduled them kind of far apart. One at the very beginning of this coming semester, and one at the end of the close to the end of the following semester. So right now, I'm learning all the music for the first one, which is at the end of September. I'm working on a piece right now that is very different than anything I've worked on before. So it's posing a lot of challenges that I've never really experienced in such a concentrated way before.
Hmm.
So it's kind of a puzzle and a journey every day when I sit to look at that music, going about figuring out how to do certain things
Wow. Have you ever played a piece you do not like or did not like?
that I did not like.
Uh-huh.
Um, hmm. I don't think so because I don't think I've ever been actually forced to play anything that I don't like. I think a lot of the time we get to choose our own repertoire and choose who we get to work with and things like that. So we are very seldom are in a situation where we are required to do something that we don't necessarily want to do or like to do. So I've enjoyed to varying degrees everything that I've done up till now.
Well, when you went to Guyana on your trip, I want to
Yeah.
shift a little bit. You did discuss music to some degree.
Yes.
What was that experience like for you
It was
visiting
a very
Guyana?
strange experience because that I was not prepared for necessarily. That was a kind of something my aunt asked me to do the last time I was in Guyana anyway. So I wasn't really prepared to do anything there. I really didn't have any materials with me or anything like that. So most of what I did were just things that were in my recent history, my recent repertoire from my recent history.
Hmm.
So that was a unique experience, I would say.
You know, to the audience, we did discuss the possibility of you playing a piece here tonight, but the place where you would have the piano, you don't have a Skype access to Skype there, right?
No, no, no. Normally, where I would have done it was probably been at the university, but the summer hours at the university are really strange, so the university is well locked up by
Oh,
now.
okay, gotcha,
Mm.
gotcha. So, Jared, what advice will you give to a young person thinking of becoming a pianist?
What would I advise? That, if it's something that you really feel compelled to do and really feel that you're going to be good at, then, you can't let anything, you know, steer you otherwise. You really just have to put in the time, the effort, the energy, and, the love too, and really go for it.
At your level of playing, and I'm curious about this, you on
Hmm.
stage with other musicians and so on. Um, have you ever been in the middle of a recital or middle of a song, and somebody played a wrong note or several wrong notes and so on?
Hmm.
Has that ever happened to you? And
Oh,
how?
all the time. I don't think honestly I've ever played anything that was no perfect. No, let me not say that. That's not necessarily true. I've played things really, really well before, I think. But those kinds of things happen all the time with everybody. I don't think anybody has ever, has never made a mistake or anything like that. But again, it's part of, if you a note error is the maybe the least of all sins when you're playing music. A note error sometimes, most people who are listening to many things don't know even what the music is like. So a note error, you know what the correct notes are because you've been working on a certain piece so long. But to 98% of the people listening, they don't know if it's a correct note or not. So it has no effect on what the music is doing for them, and therefore it should have no effect on what it's doing to you
You ever
as a
had
performer.
you ever had an experience where someone came up to you, someone who you played somewhere, you made a mistake, and someone came up to you afterwards and pointed that out? I mean, have you ever met someone like that at one of your performances?
Yeah, that happens sometimes too, and I don't quite see the point in that because it's what well a that might be the case, but there really is nothing I can do about it after the fact. B, most of the time the people saying that are usually not capable of doing it any better than you anyway. So it's like, okay, thank you for sharing something that you have no, you know. So the varying degrees
Uh-huh.
of that kind of thing.
Which is more important to you, the music score, or the style and the way it is played? It is
Oh,
executed.
absolutely, the interpretation and this and correct style and things like that. Because that's where the real music is. The real music is not necessarily in the notes.
Uh huh.
The notes are, a vehicle. The score is a vehicle to communicating what the music is.
So tell us a little bit about interpretation. I mean, you've mentioned that several times tonight. For those of us who are not, in the music arena,
Hmm.
I mean, we can guess, but what does it really mean to musicians?
Well, if you want to think of it in terms of more popular forms, it's like you wouldn't necessarily, you wouldn't hear necessarily. Um, you wouldn't necessarily hear a rap song being done in a country style. That kind of really doesn't make sense, and it doesn't, it's that kind of thing,
Gotcha,
you
gotcha.
know.
Yeah,
Um, Different periods of music have different styles, different ways of communicating the music, different ways of different performance practices, things like that, and all those things, lend themselves to what the interpretation is. Pianos back in the 1700s are nothing like the pianos are nowadays. So how do you play something that sounded a certain way, 300 years ago on something that was built today? So those kinds of things affect interpretation as well.
hmm.
Musicians nowadays, it's our responsibility to make things as accurate as possible, and part of accuracy comes in making it sound like how it probably sounded when it was written. And the challenge there lies in doing that with an instrument that didn't exist when those pieces were written. So
How,
that's part of the challenge with interpretation.
I'm just curious to know how you manage that. I mean, the sound seems so different in terms of the instrument.
Hmm.
How you manage that?
Well, understanding of what instruments may have been like. For instance, early pianos, we have different pedals on the piano. One of which, the one that's used the most, is for sustaining. Now, very very early keyboard instruments don't have sustaining, so that kind of already tells you how much pedal you would use in a modern instrument. You probably wouldn't use very much because there was none available.
Gotcha.
When early keyboard instruments were in early pianos, even while they do have pedals that were for sustaining, the depth of the sound was not quite the same. So you can pedal certain things, but the sound will decay faster on earlier instruments. Whereas now the sound is it's much stronger and has a lot more depth to it. So a sustained tone will last a lot longer on a modern instrument than it would on an antique, an older keyboard instrument. So now we have to kind of concern ourselves with how often we have to pedal in order to accomplish those same kinds of sounds. I mean, that's just one example. Piano keys were a lot shallower on early keyboard instruments. So you can play hard and it would be a certain level of sound. Whereas now, if we did that same kind of thing, we would just blast away, and the sound would be quite profound, quite
Mhm.
far more deep, far more profound than it would have been, and which certain instances that would probably not be very appropriate. So, and it wouldn't do justice to the music either.
Mhm.
If the music was written in such a way that it sounds light and we just hammer through it, then we're not really doing justice to the instrument or to the music.
If you had to, um, do you compose? Right. By the way.
A little bit, a
A
little
little
bit.
bit.
It's not necessarily my main thing, but I do have done quite a bit of it in the past.
What do you like thinking about when you're listening to your favorite music?
Listening to what I compose,
Mm.
um, I don't know. There's so many aspects of composition that I don't think I quite have under control yet. There's so many great composers who can, their methods are such that they really do well to convey the things that they're trying to put down. Certain types of phrases, certain types of articulation mean certain things, and express certain ideas and certain emotions and things like that. And when you put all those things together to create something, a stream of thought or something like that, I think that's a really great thing. That I don't think I have quite under control yet. So while I find some of the things I write to be entertaining, I don't necessarily think I've really mastered capturing those types of those methods of communication.
So, what do you think about music being important for providing emotional balance and comfort?
Repeat that one more time.
What do you think about music, right, being important
hmm
for providing emotional balance and comfort?
Um, I think it's very important
Hmm.
because I think there's a type of music, classical music or otherwise, it could be anything, popular music, that really says something to somebody. And there's a type of music I think that fits with everybody. And when you find what that type of music is for you, whether it be classical or not, I think it can do a lot for you emotionally. So I think it's very important in that respect.
Studying, creating, or playing music, where do you feel most comfortable and why?
Studying and performing. Creating, I think creating it's a very broad term, I think, because creating can be anything from composing
Hmm.
to interpreting to making it up on the spot even. Improvising is a special thing because it's kind of like a cross between composing and performing. Improvising, it's not something meant to be written down, I think, because it comes from you at that moment. It comes from um, the way you feel about something at that moment, and you might not feel that same way the next time you play that same piece.
Hmm.
So I think that is a method of creating. I think that isn't encompassed in composition or in performance. So I think all those things come together in different ways.
In the chat room, Pat asked, where do you get your inspiration?
Where do I get my inspiration? In general or
Well, they
in
didn't
each
say. Well, let
individual
me let me
piece?
let me let me ask in general. Yeah.
Okay. In general, every now and again you hear something that you absolutely love and you feel inspired to try and reproduce that, to try and create that, to try and see how that piece or that will fit with you. And I think that's trying to make something my own and create something for myself. I think that drives me to want to do it.
Okay. Patrick said good night to you and your guests. Good night, Patrick. And Patrick said, what do you do for fun when you're not playing or thinking about music?
When I'm not thinking or playing music, I love movies. I love going to the movies. I think I go to the movies, you know, twice a week. If sometimes it's just fun, or doing my drawings sometimes.
Uh-huh.
Um, just being with my friends, being around people that I love and whose company I enjoy.
Is there a song that you never tire of playing?
A song that I'm never tired of playing. Um, hmm.
Why
That's
are
a
you
good question.
thinking about that one, right? Here's
Yes,
another
that
one.
one.
What favorite song do you play when you're practicing?
Um, that's kind of hard to answer because sometimes my practicing doesn't really allow me to go too crazy on something. But there there are a couple of pieces that I first learned when I first started private lessons, some Chopin pieces, Chopin waltz, that sometimes I come back to because I think over the years my understanding of what that is, especially because that's one of the very first things I played.
Right.
I think I enjoy seeing what the progression has been like in my understanding of it from when I first did it till now, 10 years later.
But Patrick said, please say redemption song.
Please what?
Please say it is redemption song. I guess to the question I asked you, what song you never get tired of?
I'll have to put together a piano arrangement of that, maybe.
Yeah, Jared, as a matter of fact, yes, I would love for you to do that. I'll put it up on the website. Now that you become a member of CWS, I'll put it up on the website so others can go and listen to it.
All right, I'll have to do it. I'll put together an arrangement of it.
Okay, great. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
What turns me on creatively, spiritually, emotionally? Sometimes it's in the work I do with other people because they get really excited about some things. Sometimes my friends get excited about things before I do, and I think their excitement kind of gets me going too.
Gotcha.
Because sometimes I'm slow on the uptake, I think maybe.
What creative project are you working on now?
Right now, I just finished a bunch of recitals with a violist. My friend and I had that voice recital last weekend, and I did a few operas about a month ago. Well, right now, my next big thing is my first doctoral recital at the end of September. So right now, I'm heavy in working on that material.
And a question I ask all my guests, Jared, so you can't get away from it. What makes you laugh out loud?
Oh my goodness. What makes me laugh out loud? My friends and I are the craziest people on the planet. So we do all sorts of crazy things. And the crazier it is, the more we laugh. I think it's just, we all have very interesting views on the world and the way the world works. And I think we just spend time entertaining each other with, those different kinds of antics. Sharing what we think of things that are happening and, our views on everything.
When you guys get together, right?
Yeah.
Hanging out. Or let's say you're in a music room or around instruments.
Mm-hmm.
How to phrase this? Who is most inclined to say, let's go and jam, or does someone start jamming or playing and then the rest join in? How does that work? Or does it happen that way?
It happens sometimes. I don't think it happens very often. Partially because the music rooms at school aren't very big, so you don't venture to get too many people in at one time. But when it does happen, I think it just kind of starts as one thing and evolves into something completely different. Somebody might start humming something. Somebody might start pushing a key on the piano or something like that, and then it just turns into craziness.
Wow, Jared. Time is upon us, and I have to thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me on.
You're quite welcome. You're quite welcome. It was indeed a pleasure. I'm looking forward to that arrangement. Patrick is gonna hold my feet to the fire for that, so you have to make sure you do it.
I have to make good on that.
And thank you, and I hope one day you'll come back. But it has been quite informative, and I actually enjoyed it. So thank you so much, Jared.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And so with that, I say good night.
Good night to you.
And take care.
Likewise. Thank you very much.
This is Selwyn Collins saying good night.
Suffer the little children to come unto me. Every day, more than 30,000 children around the world die of preventable diseases.